Well, welcome back to the Spiritual Reality Podcast. I took a little bit of a break over spring break after finishing up that series that I did on, three-part series that I did on James Tallarico. If you missed that series on Tallarico, you need to go back and you need to catch it and you need to watch it with your kids. Tallarico is a progressive Christian, which means that he's hijacking Christianity in order to make it whatever he wants it to be, basically. But the dangerous thing is that the re-explanations that he offers for biblical concepts are pervasive online, and your kids are being bombarded with these ideas. And so if you don't get on top of these conversations with your kids, one day they're going to look at you and they're going to say, all the things that you have told me are wrong in the Bible are not wrong at all. You just don't know what the real interpretation of those passages is. And that may just sound like, okay, so I'm going to have a dispute with my kids over interpretation, but progressive Christianity is fundamentally a new gospel. It's a gospel that preaches that sin is not the problem. Jesus was just a good example for us. Jesus is whatever we want to make him. They don't believe the whole Bible is inspired. And the answer to the world's problems is not transformation that comes from repentance and faith in Jesus, but social justice. So a progressive Christian really is not a Christian at all. They've taken pieces of the Bible, they've made their own religion. So I just want to encourage you, go back and listen to those episodes, digest those things. He is making some of the most common progressive Christianity, progressive theology arguments that people typically make. Your kids are hearing these things. You've got to have this conversation with your kids. Some of you watch and listen on a regular basis to the Spiritual Reality Podcast, but you haven't gone to the YouTube channel and subscribed yet. And that one act helps me out a lot. So make sure you take a moment to do that right now. Today, what we're going to get into is 3 issues that have been in the news lately. And the first one is I want to talk about the firing of the NBA player Jaden Ivey. I also want to talk a little bit about the Pope's statement about war, and I want to hit on the Supreme Court ruling about the Colorado conversion therapy case. So thanks for hanging out with me. Let's get to it. Well, you've probably heard that the Chicago Bulls released Jaden Ivey due to a post that he made about the NBA's Pride celebrations. And he described the observances as celebrating unrighteousness, is what he said. He was released because the official reason that they released him was because of conduct detrimental to the team. And so there's several factors I really want to break down when it comes to this whole situation. The first thing is, this is not a free speech violation. I know that in the conservative world and the Christian world, that would make a lot of people mad to hear me say that, but let's just be consistent here, right? We've talked about other cases on the show where someone posted something that was offensive to Christians or said something violent. Recently, a nurse made a terrible comment about Caroline Levitt and her unborn baby, and I believe she was fired and her license was suspended for that. And so in those cases, when the left has said something like that, what we have said is look, you're going to suffer consequences at work, right? That's not a free speech issue. That you have the right to say whatever you want to say, that's true. But when we talk about the right to say whatever you want to say, and that's where we all struggle in American culture, right? We all want to go, well, it's a free country and I have free speech. Yeah, what that means is you won't get arrested. The government is not going to arrest you for your opinions. That's what that means. Right? But that doesn't mean that the people that you associate with, the church you associate with, the business you associate with, that they're okay with being represented by what you said. And if they want to part ways with you over that, if there are consequences, natural social consequences or employment consequences for what you said, then that can happen. And so it's important to understand that the NBA decided that celebrating LGBTQ lifestyles is a major value for their organization. And it's an expectation, evidently, they have for their employees. I don't think they're being consistent about it. We're going to talk about that in a minute. but they do not want their players and employees criticizing something that they feel so strongly about and they seem to stand for. So they have the right to part ways with people that don't represent them the way that they want to be represented. Now, he may have a small shot at a religious discrimination case. You can't force somebody, even in the context of employment, to kind of go against their religion. And so really that is something that some people need to kind of take to court at some point. But Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits employment discrimination because of religion, including failure to accommodate sincerely held beliefs and retaliation for religious expression. However, courts distinguish between firing someone for believing Christian doctrine versus firing them for how they express it publicly or disruptively. That's a fine line when you think about it. If you believe it, so how far do you have to go to have said it wrong? That's my question. But the organization, the Bulls were really wise to say that they were releasing him for conduct detrimental to the team and not say that it was for what he said, the content of what he said. That would have opened them up to greater possibility of a successful religious discrimination lawsuit. And so this is a moment where the NBA has shown that they value their celebration of sin over players' consciences. And they have shown that they have no room for biblical values whatsoever. Of course, the rest of the country is free not to support them and free not to watch them if they don't hold those same values that they're promoting. And so I think that's the first thing, is this is not a free speech issue. And I want to make sure you understand that when it comes to your employment, it's not a free speech issue. The second thing, and this might be even more disturbing, is that those that are supportive of the decision to release him seem to want to frame this as an issue where he is mentally unstable. Coach Donovan said, I think it's a situation for him where, it's on his own personal Instagram. I don't want to get into what he put out there on Instagram, but certainly for him, I hope he's okay. Many have pointed out that he confessed on a podcast recently that he had a very hard upbringing and that as an adult even had considered suicide a couple of times. But when you look at the laws that are being passed in Canada where quoting parts of the Bible will get you put in jail, it's a little scary how quick that people are to act like that a person who says something that is out of sync with the woke blob that makes you crazy. Or a person who says something that's biblical, that makes you crazy. This has shades of the old Soviet Union where Christians were institutionalized with fake diagnoses in order to suppress religion as they established a very atheistic society. So while Ivey may have had some struggles in the past, the idea that he is online giving his opinions about biblical issues does not mean that he needs help. And so I think it's a little scary that they're framing it that way. Along the same lines, the Patriots running back Travion Henderson posted a supportive post, basically reshared something that Ivey put up, and then said under it, Matthew 5:10, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And guess what his head coach said? Mike Vrabel said he wants players like Henderson to express what they believe, and he added that he wants to make sure, but he also added that he wants to make sure that they are educated. Man, like speaking of Marxism and communism, can you say re-education camp? So in other words, Travion Henderson is not crazy, but he needs to be sent somewhere probably for re-education because he's not thinking correctly. So to wrap this topic up, I just want to say that I have so much respect for his courage to stand against something that he's being forced to support. Many people have pointed to people like Steph Curry, who claims to be a Christian but doesn't speak out on those kinds of things, and they say that's how you should handle it. And I think it might be possible if this wasn't something that players were being forced to participate in. We've seen players in other sports say, "I'm not wearing that rainbow hat," or "I'm not wearing that patch on my uniform for the Pride game. I'm not doing it," because I can't personally support this. These players are put in very difficult situations if they're believers in these kinds of situations. Many of us work for organizations that quietly support things we don't agree with, but they're not necessarily coming back at us and saying, I need you to be a part of this. Many teachers are forced to join the NEA. Your company may donate to causes that you disagree with. But if they're coming around and saying to you, you have to donate or you're fired, or you have to participate in a day that celebrates this particular organization that you disagree with, that's a different story. Culture is somewhat shifting a little bit more to common sense right now, it feels like, over the last few years, but evil never takes a day off. And so I would say situations like this will become more and more common. Christians are going to find themselves having to decide that they need to take a stand for their faith and not just go along. When someone does something like this, the crazy thing about it is that more people are often emboldened to step up and speak out as well. If you remember in the book of Daniel, before Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to decide that they were going to take a stand against the king's idol and worshiping it and ended up in the fiery furnace, they first participated in a kind of protest, a very peaceful, respectful protest that Daniel courageously led and said, hey, we're not going to eat this food that defiles what we feel like religiously we're supposed to eat. And so him stepping up in those early chapters of Daniel probably had a lot to do with them having the guts to do it when they were faced with the fiery furnace. And so Ivey is not a top-tier player in the NBA, which is probably why they let him go. No one honestly believes that he would have been let go if he was somebody like Anthony Edwards, who, by the way, made a video using what was deemed homophobic language and was only fined for it. No one believes that he would have been fired, that somebody like Anthony Edwards would have been fired for doing the exact same thing Ivey did because he's too important to the NBA and he's too important to his team, which brings up an issue as well. If that is your standard, why are you not applying it evenly? But look at what Ivey's example has done. Legitimate stars in other leagues are coming out in support, and some other basketball players are even saying things like, "Well, I guess you just need to go ahead and fire me too, if that's where we're going to stand on this thing." The left is extremely militant in enforcing their views, and so there's never going to be a time that Christians are not facing this tension. So it's important for Christians that we really think through, like, where is the line where I'm just saying I can't be a part of this anymore. I've got to say something, and we need to have the courage to do it when we hit that point. Now, let's get into the Pope's statement on war. Recently, Pope Leo made the comment that God does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war. This is another example of how the Catholic Church is not guided by Scripture but by opinions. What Bible is he reading? Like, seriously, many times God commands war against groups of people who are extremely ungodly and doing things like child sacrifice, and God commands war against them. Maybe the Pope is unaware of that. Joshua prayed for the sun to stand still so he could finish the job against the 5 Amorite kings. Remember, Joshua was there to conquer their land. So there right there is an illustration of God answering the prayer of a person who, if you want to use his term, wages war. So I assume he might be thinking not people who are being defensive in war, but people who are waging it. Maybe he forgot that David in Psalm 144, verse 1 said, "Praise be to the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle." There are many times that God hears the prayers of people in battle in the Bible. And you can pick those apart and you can say, well, were they being attacked or were they doing the attacking? However, Joshua, his whole goal was to conquer somebody else's land. And in Joshua chapter 5, before the battle of Jericho, the Lord appears to Joshua to encourage him. Again, Joshua is on the offensive here because God has determined that Jericho should be judged. And Joshua didn't even have to seek God in prayer. God sought him out and had a conversation with him. There's one verse that people like the Pope might try to use to make this point. Isaiah 1:15 says this, "When you spread out your hands in prayer, I hide my eyes from you. Even when you offer many prayers, I'm not listening. Your hands are full of blood. However, the context of that passage shows that this verse is not about war at all. So some might point to the fact that God did not allow David to build the temple because he was a man of war and he had shed blood. However, God was not saying that those wars were wrong or that he didn't endorse those wars, because he did. He was just saying that he wanted his house to be built and represented by a man who represented rest and peace. God had endorsed the wars that David had fought, and he had listened to his prayers during those wars. Read the book of Psalms. This was just a matter of roles, and David was not a good fit for God in this situation for this particular role. So the Pope is way off on this. I can appreciate that he just wants peace. I get that. However, in this situation, this conflict may have been necessary to avoid much more disastrous wars in the future. I don't have all the intel briefing that went into this decision to go ahead and strike Iran, and guess what? You don't either. History will tell us if this was essential or not. However, the Pope's statement does not stand up on its own merits biblically. And I think it's important to remember, too, that he is a religious leader who does not have on him the same pressure of a president or a prime minister in these matters. He has leadership pressure that deals with his religion, but not in these areas. And it means nothing for him to come out and say something nice like this. Like, hey, God doesn't listen to the prayers of, or we just need everybody to get along. We just need peace. That's nice. That's wonderful. However, if the president of the United States or the prime minister of Israel is wrong about these issues, or just takes a can't we all play nice approach, we could end up having nuclear war on Israel, or long-range missiles reaching Europe, even the U.S. perhaps. Iran has been a real legitimate threat to the civilized world for a long time. They have continued to make their intentions clear. They have not wanted peace unless we're paying them huge sums of cash to pretend to play nice. So again, it is very easy for a religious leader to say general things like God wants peace, God doesn't hear the prayers of warmongers. But the consequences of those statements will not come back on him. He makes a statement, it influences people, but this never comes back on him because he's not sitting in the hot seat having to make these decisions, and he doesn't have the intelligence that he needs. By that I mean the briefings, intel briefings. The unfortunate thing is that he claims to believe the Bible, and he's grossly misrepresented it here. All right, one more topic this week. We're playing catch up, right? Because we were off for a couple of weeks here for spring break. But this week, the Supreme Court ruled 8-1 that the Colorado ban on so-called conversion therapy is unconstitutional. In 2019, Colorado enacted HB 19-1129, one of the first statewide bans on so-called conversion therapy for minors. The law prohibits licensed mental professionals from engaging in any practice, primarily talk therapy, that attempts to change a minor's sexual orientation, gender identity, behaviors, attractions, or gender expressions. It defines conversion therapy very broadly to cover efforts to convert someone away from LGBTQ plus identities. However, the law explicitly permits and does not restrict therapy that affirms, supports, explores, or assists with a minor's self-identified sexual orientation or gender identity, including gender transition. The state justified the ban on medical consensus from major health organizations that conversion therapy is ineffective and harmful, according to them, linked to higher risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide among youth. Similar laws exist in 20 to 25 other states plus D.C. as well. So Kaylee Childs is a licensed professional counselor in Colorado Springs who provides talk therapy informed by her Christian faith. And she argued that the law prevented her from fully respecting clients, including minors, self-determined goals, such as reducing unwanted same-sex attractions, changing certain behaviors, aligning gender identity with biological sex, when these goals conflicted with the ban. And so she's coming at this saying, hey, like you're putting me in a spot where like I may have somebody coming to me saying what I would like is I would like to know, can I reduce these feelings? Can I change? Can I head in a different direction? And she's saying, you've tied my hands. I can't help them with what their stated purpose is. Chiles said she does not force change, but helps clients explore their own objectives through conversation. She filed a pre-enforcement lawsuit in 2022 claiming the ban violated her First Amendment rights to free speech, and so she sought to block enforcement against her. So I'm not totally familiar with this, so it may be the case that they were beginning to look at charging her for breaking this ban, but she took the initiative and she went ahead and filed a pre-enforcement lawsuit in 2022. So she went to court first against them, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second. The lower courts said this: the federal district court found Chiles had standing, but denied a preliminary injunction. So they would not place an injunction on the ban to stop it, so that she could operate how she wants to. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit upheld the law, ruling that it regulated professional conduct, how licensed therapists treat clients, with only incidental effects on speech, they said. So then Chiles petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court, which heard arguments on October 7th of last year. The Supreme Court reversed the 10th Circuit and remanded the case for further proceedings. It did not outright strike down the law in a final sense, but the practical effect is that Colorado's ban, and likely things like this, will almost certainly fall on remand. So the majority opinion, they pointed out things like that the law as applied to Chiles' talk therapy regulates speech based on viewpoint and content and not just conduct. Secondly, it forbids therapists from expressing one set of views that sexual orientation or gender identity should or could be possibly changed, while allowing the opposite views, affirming, supporting those identities. They also said that this is viewpoint discrimination, and especially blatant form of content-based speech restriction, which is presumptively unconstitutional, they said, and triggers what they called strict scrutiny, the highest level of review. Under strict scrutiny, the government must prove that the law is narrowly tailored to serve a compelling interest, and few laws survive that filter. Also, there's no special. They also said that there's no special professional speech exception that lowers First Amendment protection for licensed counselors. The First Amendment protects speech equally, whether inside or outside a professional setting, when the regulation targets the message itself, not incidental conduct like physical interventions and things like that. So we're just talking about speech here. What this means going forward, the case returns to lower courts, which must now apply that filter of strict scrutiny. Given the majority's analysis, the ban is very likely to be invalidated as applied to talk therapy by licensed professionals like Chiles. This has nationwide ripple effects. Similar bans in other states face the same First Amendment challenge and are now on shaky legal ground for speech-based counseling. The rule does not affect bans on non-talk practices, aversive physical or chemical interventions, or unlicensed individuals. It also doesn't prevent states from regulating therapy in other ways that don't target specific viewpoints. Advocates for the ban call it a setback for protecting LGBTQ youth from discredited and harmful practices. Supporters of the challenge hailed it as a victory for free speech, for client self-determination, and preventing government viewpoint censorship in counseling. In short, the U.S. Supreme Court treated this as a core First Amendment issue of government picking sides in a debate over sexual orientation and gender identity rather than a pure professional regulation case. The decision obviously strongly favors the therapist's free speech claim. So, this was a big deal for religious freedom as well, although this case was not presented on the grounds of religious freedom. Childs is a Christian. People sought her out for her Christian perspective. And in a sense, people like her were being told what to believe about this issue and being told that they had to comply with things that they did not believe in. And this was also awful for scientific advancement in this area, by the way. If one side of the debate is completely shut down, you can't ever really know which way is best. And that's something that we really struggle with in the entire scientific world in general. Frankly, most of the time, the group that does not want the other side to be able to make their case or have a chance to demonstrate their effectiveness, they are not usually on the best side. Make no mistake, this was an attempt by the state of Colorado to silence the Christian view and tell Christians what they must support. And I'm really shocked that the decision was 8-1. I honestly thought a couple of the other liberal judges would go along with Jackson, but I'm thankful that it went that way. Now, let me say something that you may think is a little bit crazy. We need more lawsuits like this. As conservatives and believers, we have been playing defense all along, and we've not been going on the offensive. And so we need to help organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom, who was involved in this case. For years, Christians have ceded cultural territory by being afraid that we might be sued over something. Christian teachers have been afraid to mention their faith in response to a student's question. Like a student may ask a question about, hey, what about you personally? And they couldn't say, well, my faith. They felt like they couldn't. Although constitutionally, there's no reason they couldn't. But they were afraid because what if I get sued? Students in universities have been afraid to argue their worldview in a class because they didn't want to be discriminated against. And so we've just shrunk back further and further into the background. We need to go on the offensive like Childs did. It's funny that some Christians will say that we shouldn't go to bat for our rights. That's not Christ-like. Well, tell that to the Apostle Paul, who claimed his right to be a citizen of Rome, to not be beaten before his trial. And in Acts chapter 16, when he was unjustly arrested, this was his response when they were going to release him. They just wanted to quietly let him out of jail. And here's what Paul said to the officers. He said, they beat us publicly without a trial, and even though we were Roman citizens, and then they threw us into prison. And now they want to get rid of us quietly. No, let them come down and escort us out. And so I just love that. He's just saying, hey, listen, you did me wrong. You took my rights away, and you just want to be quiet about this, and then you want me to be quiet about this? No, the officials that have done this to me are going to come down here and escort me out so everybody can see it and see that they did the wrong thing. He was publicly calling out the injustice that they had endured. And it's interesting that some Christians will say, the same Christians a lot of times that will say that we should never assert our rights. And they say that we're supposed to be persecuted, right? Jesus said we're going to be persecuted, right? But then they turn around and they talk about praying for and helping Christians who are persecuted in other countries, like in Nigeria, for instance. So now when people are actually being locked up and killed, they want to do something about it. They want to say, hey, these people have rights. Let's stand up for their rights. I'm all for helping those people. I totally agree with that. But why can't we do something about that before that starts happening? Why can't we stand up for those rights as we see them slipping away? Jesus warns us that the world is going to hate us and they're going to be opposed to us, but he doesn't tell us to go looking for it, or not utilize the means that we have been given and are available to us to avoid that. And so I think we need to step up and be much more involved, like this therapist Childs was. Or did, and just go ahead and say, you know what, I'm not going to comply, and I'm going to get in touch with one of these organizations and get representation, and we're going to go after this. I think we need much more of this. If you're a student in a university and you get discriminated against because of your faith, you need to contact somebody. And so that is all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you next week.